Thank you for the Asia Society Institute for inviting us here. I'm really glad to be here, and good evening, everyone. The topic today is very interesting. It's all over the news. So, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Uh, in some ways, it is a historical, development. If one looks at, for example, the idea of trade routes in the Indian Ocean region, this is something which goes back. And this Gulf region or West Asia region has been historically at the intersection of the trade routes between Europe, Africa, and Asia, as well as South Asia. So in some ways, it is very important to recognize that this is something which is a revival of historical trade route, which was there. The other thing which is very important in my view is there is this geopolitics of connectivity projects and so on. That is something which everybody is talking about and which is also important. But, for any new projects to be announced, there is always the devil is always in the details. So if we look at this specific corridor, we see that there are three segments: the India to Gulf, and then from UAE via Saudi Arabia to Israel, Haifa port, and from there to Greece, and then forward to the European countries. So these three segments, most of it is already functional. I mean, it's the trade between India and UAE or Gulf countries is already, thriving. If you look at Europe and Gulf trade, that is also substantive. It is the regional part, the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, which is where there is lesser, you would say, the existing infrastructure, and which is in progress actually. So even there, it is in progress. So this is not something completely from the scratch. The other part which is also interesting is that there are many countries or regions, you can say, which are involved. You have Europe on the one hand, the European Union, Germany, Italy, France, who are part of the MOU. And then you have UAE, Israel, Saudi Arabia from the region, and then India and the United States as a, as a converging point for all these actors to come together and think of something like this. In that sense, also it is slightly different from other connectivity projects where you have mostly either it is bilateral or it is even though multilateral, transnational in that sense, but it's one to another and another to third country. It's not in that sense a collective project the way this is being at least imagined at this point. So if one looks at all these things, there are obviously, one cannot really ignore the challenges which might come across. For example, Dr. Omair Anas will be perhaps able to shed more light on that. Turkey has already, kind of expressed, Erdogan in his own, inevitable style, has already immediately expressed his opposition to this, saying that, you cannot have any such connectivity project without Turkey. Obviously, the Turkey-Greece maritime dispute in the Mediterranean is something which is key here. And also there would be the Iran factor, for example, if one looks at it in the sense that, you have the Chabahar, the INSTC, which is already there. So, Iran has not been really very vocal about how they have been looking at it, but so they might not really be, or might see this as a competitor in terms of their own ambitions as a regional junction kind of in a global trade. And then you have the Egypt factor, because if you look at it, basically you are bypassing Suez Canal. So how will Egypt react? They have also not been very vocal about it so far. It will certainly reduce the distance and time, but will economically, financially affect Egypt. So that is another factor to kind of recognize. So with all these things, obviously the global geopolitics also has to be understood. So with all these things, one has to take into account when one is analyzing it in a kind of a strategic development. So, I will not take too much time in the beginning itself, and I'll request Dr. Omair Anas, who is currently teaching in Ankara Yildirim University, right? And is also very active with the Center for India-West Asia Dialogue. So over to you, around 10 to 15 minutes. I would be, also request you to give us some perspective of why Turkey has been so vocal, apart from that Mediterranean politics. What is the thought process in Ankara at this point? Over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Professor Siraja Mohan, for this wonderful opportunity. And I must say that this topic has become one of the most talked about topic since the G20 summit has ended up. I must begin with by saying that this politics of corridor is not new. It has been quite old. When I say politics of corridor, I mean the competitiveness of corridor. Of course, Silk Route was there, but there was no challenge to Silk Route. It was uniting many civilizations and cultures, and everybody was on the same page in using that corridor. But when, if you search the archives of 19th century, especially from 1857 to 1900, you will find a lot of references that there were so many corridors being proposed from Moscow to Delhi, from London to Delhi, from Berlin to Delhi. And all of these three forces, they were having their own geostrategic calculations in connecting with New Delhi and other Asian markets. Of course, there were all calculations behind these competitiveness. When we talk about India-Middle East Economic Corridor, this corridor has not come into a vacuum. There are a lot of corridors being talked about. BRI is in full force, has already expanded, and built a lot of infrastructure also in several countries. Many trains and many routes have already started. So BRI is one of the projects which China says that they have really done something, and they believe that this is one of the new and most very vibrant trade corridor which they have built. So what is the uniqueness of India-Middle East Economic Corridor then, when there are so many corridors? So that is why the opposition to India-Middle East Economic Corridor, when it started, vocally from Turkey, of course, but very quietly, I think Iranians also not very much happy about this corridor, because they are seen as excluded due to US sanctions and many other reasons. At the same time, Egypt, one of the closest friends of India, is not feeling very well, because they understand that they make almost $10 billion annually from Suez Canal. And if such a corridor is going to bypass the busiest port and busiest canal in the world, it means that Egypt is going to lose a lot of money. And especially in the time when Egypt is not doing well economically, and it's not doing well in political terms as well. So Iran, Egypt, and Turkey, all of these countries have not taken this initiative very well. Of course, Turkey, interestingly, the first person in Turkey who criticized this economic corridor was not Erdogan, but the opposition candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Before Erdogan returned to Ankara, he made a detailed tweet that Erdogan has failed in his G20 summit because he was sidelined by the G20 powers, and especially in the economic corridor. And after that tweet, Erdogan started responding, and he said that no corridor can be successful without including Turkey in that project. So we have to see this the introduction of India Middle East Economic Corridor in this context of competitiveness of many corridors. At the same time, what I have understand is that there is an element of international rivalry happening between India and China, US and China, and of course the gradual and steady isolation of Russia from the world stage. What we are seeing today is that for the last 2 years, we can see that Russia is almost sidelined on many international affairs. Russia has lost a lot of credibility, a lot of role in world politics. And of course, India was so much relying on Russia for many things, especially on diplomacy. Also, Russia has been supporting India on many issues. In the last 2 years, when Russia has lost that much international influence, it was one of the best times for India to assert its leadership. So what I see is that in this context, India has found an opportune time to make its own international diplomacy known to the world. And what I use the word, I don't know whether our friends in New Delhi, they use this term or not, but this is time of global India. I think that British politicians, they have sometimes used global Britain in the last diplomatic document, or in some strategic visions, they have used the concept of global Britain. In the same sense, I think that this is time when the Modi government is trying to introduce a resurgent India. Most of the BJP documents, they use the term resurgent, but I would say positively that this is global India which Prime Minister Modi and his government is trying to introduce on world stage. And in this sense, of course, India would like to compete with BRI and with other routes, and would like to create a space for itself, especially in the Middle East. And why Middle East is so important for India? Because for all reasons, the world, especially the United States and European countries, they had withdrawn from the Middle East, and there is a security vacuum in the Middle East, and there is no power which is ready to take responsibility of security of the Middle East, especially Russia and China. They are not in position to offer too much, especially the kind of guarantees which Saudis are really demanding. So no country is going to offer that much. Even the United States, in exchange of normalization with Israel, the Saudis are demanding too much, a permanent guarantee of security. So the Americans are not ready to offer that kind of things. So with this kind of initiative, the Americans and with India and Gulf countries, they are trying to make a multilateral setup in which the security of Saudis and security of the Persian Gulf can also be guaranteed along with these trade and multilateral arrangements. So what I understand is that it is more than a trade route, more than a corridor, and more than an economic issue. It is also a strategic vision put forward by Indians and Saudis and of course the United States. And if it is successful, of course it is going to fill the vacuum left by of course the United States as well as Russia and China there. However, this corridor politics is not free from many challenges, many questions, and questions of viability as well. For example, whether India can replace China or not. The Chinese trade with European Union is almost 850 billion euro, and Indian trade with European Union, all European countries, is around 250 billion euro. So there is a gap of 600 billion euro. With Middle East as well, the Chinese trade is almost $400 billion, and Indian trade is around 250, and major part of this trade volume is Indian import of petroleum and energy resources. How India is going to make this corridor economically and financially viable? By pumping a lot of goods there, and how much India can supply to the world, especially to the Middle East as well as to the European and larger Western and Latin American or African markets. That is one of the biggest questions which I think that India has to expand its capacity dramatically to make this corridor successful. The existing trade volume and existing trade pattern shows that most of the things do not need this kind of corridor because it may be quite expensive for them. They have to change at least 4 times in 4 places from Mumbai to Dubai to Haifa. These changes will make the trade more costly, and there will be charges, of course, for this. And the goods which will be sent from on this route may not be that much urgent. So traders can wait for 1 more week in exchange of lower prices. So I mean, financially, this corridor has to be viable, has to offer competitive prices as well to make it successful. So first we have to increase the volume of trade on this corridor, and this volume can be increased, number 1, by increasing our own capacity, and number 2, by including more players. And here what I understand is that Turkey perhaps has misunderstood that Turkey has been excluded, or Iran has been excluded. I think that this project cannot exclude any country, and even if it tries to exclude, the project may not be successful. Turkey is one of the fastest economy in the Middle East and largest economy in the Middle East, and Turkey itself has an ambitious plan to expand its economic reach to Asia, to Latin America, to all over the world. And of course, Turkey is doing a lot of things. So Turkey would love to be part of this process. And if Turkey joins this project, for example, if you see it like this, Turkey has free trade agreement with UAE, and India is going to have free trade agreement with UAE. And if these 3 countries have free trade agreements, it means that they have a faster and easier movement of trade and commodities in 3 markets. So similarly, Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and India are going to have better relations in coming months. It means that Turkey again is going to have good collaboration in terms of having better trade relations with all Asian markets, especially with India. And India is already Turkey's second largest trade partner after China. Their bilateral trade has reached $12 billion, and of course India is the largest partner in this trade. So what I see is that Turkey may join the project in later stage, and Iran is in complication because Iran is very much connected with entire Eurasian markets with multiple roads, with multiple connecting corridor projects. And after this Armenian-Azerbaijan crisis, there is a possibility that peace process will happen between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And then another trade route which is going to be more economically useful and viable, which will connect Iranian Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan and then to Armenia, and from there to Georgia and Europe. So it means again Azerbaijan has to be there and Iran has to be there, and then I don't think that India is going to ignore that very profitable, very successful and already in use corridor. So Iran either is going to join India-Middle East corridor in future, or India will keep this trade route in active use with its Iranian friends. So I don't think that Iran is going to be ignored, or Iran can be ignored when it comes to India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Of course, there will be some limitations, and there will be some challenges to this corridor, especially when China and Russia, they are watching very closely India's growth. I think the Russians are very much confident that India is not going to be against them. The rise of India is not going to be against them, or rise of India should not be seen as in rivalry with Russians. But of course, Chinese have their understanding that India's rise is going to be at the cost of Chinese interest in many parts of the world. However, Russians will be quite happy if India is going to rise, if India's economy is going to expand, if India's economic connectivity with the world is going to expand. Because, for example, if you see what is happening in Central Asia, Russians and Turks, they equally, both of them, they really want India to play an important role, because they see that Chinese have dominated everything in Central Asia. So to counterbalance Chinese expansion in Central Asia, they really need Turkey and India to play in tandem. Even they have invited Malaysians and Malaysian energy companies to play an active role in Azerbaijan, in other countries. So to balance China is also one of the important interests of Russians. Giving so much free hand to Chinese will of course make the world more kind of unilateral, and Chinese ambitions may become unchecked. So in that sense, Russia would like to see India play an important role and have good relations with the Middle East, with the Eurasian countries, and with the rest of the world. The trust between Russia and India in this regard is, I think that Russians know India very well. Their understanding of India is much better than any Western country. So that trust is there. That's why I think that there is no reason that Russians are going to be panicked about this corridor. Yes, of course, Chinese maybe. So with these few comments, I have tried to make a context of whether India-Middle East Economic Corridor is going to be an easy job or not. As I have made my observations that we have a lot of questions to answer, we have a lot of challenges to overcome, and we have to do a lot of things, and the list of doing things is still long. So it means that, of course, the project is promising. So the job has just started, and we have to wait and watch whether this project is going to be in the right direction, and it is going to happen within a promised time or not. So this is all I have to say at this time, and thank you very much again, and I'm going to see some question and answer after the session.
Thank you, Dr. Omair. I think you have really set the tone for the discussion, in the sense that obviously there is a lot of euphoria about the project, but then there are certain reality checks. For example, the question of security vacuum or the regional security architecture, if one can, put it that way. And then obviously the financial and economic viability, you put it very clearly that a lot of, efforts has to go into developing capacity. And it's not just about India, but also the Gulf countries. Just one point, in the sense that it may not necessarily be the same commodity which has to be exchanging, kind of ships or trains. In that sense, it can be also commodities from different, countries which can join and then go on from further. I mean, in that sense, perhaps, the example of a river, distributary and tributary kind of a system, but that will also require a much more effort, as you have very correctly pointed out. So certainly, I'm sure there would be lots of questions, and we'll now move to the another very key aspect of the corridor, and that is the European part. I would request Professor Ummu Salma Bava to give us a sense of what was the reasons for the European Union and the European countries to really join this, how they see in terms of viability, and what are their interests in that sense. So over to you, ma'am, from 10 to 15 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank ASPI and IIC and Raja here for the invitation. Where does one begin with a topic which is in news every day? And if you had a ticking, how many steps you took in a day, you could kind of track news with that kind of intentionality. I'm going to bring two different lenses of inquiry over here, not looking exactly into what has been announced as details, which is still extremely, sparse. There's a lot of speculation. The members have agreed to give 60 days to come up with, discrete and proper plans, and so we would really have to wait for the ink to dry on this understanding, which is extremely. If you look at the MOU, it's just a page. And signatures rolling on the next page. So how do we make sense of something which is being flagged as, transformative, geopolitical shift, what have you? I'm going to offer 4 sets of arguments to you. Let me first start by, looking at a bit of crystal ball gazing, because that's what we can do at this point. First is look at the name. The India, Middle East, Europe corridor, clearly the Americans came to bear in on that because we don't use the term Middle East. And I would like to draw attention to the fact that if you are accepting in the list of taxonomy somebody else's name, you could take it lightly. You could just say, we've been more expansive. What does that mean to how the world is looking? And where is the point of gravity? Did the Americans prevail on that? That's a good point to keep in mind as you look at definitions. And on the other hand, if you look at what was the subtitle, or rather the title for this meeting, it was a partnership for global infrastructure and investment. And I think it's important to keep in mind these two bookends of what geography and intentionality means in terms of redesigning or looking at the politics of what Omair was talking about, corridors and connectivity, right? Why is it important in the current context? In the backdrop of a war in Europe, where it's been a wake-up call for the European Union and the member states, war is something which has come out of history. They seem to have forgotten it. Their military budgets had plunged to the lowest. And today they are in a position of, getting back to what is actually not even the 5th domain of warfare, which was talked about, which is the space. We're back in World War II kind of a warfare with tanks and trenches. And that is something which is rattling Europe. In our part of the world, war is not a word in the dictionary which we put it away. I think that's the difference in framework when you examine, and why there is a reason to, manage policy at least with certain geographies of Asia in a very different fashion. That is becoming extremely evident. So when you look at the newer geopolitical contours of connectivity, I mean, clearly there's an attempt to, refashion the economic corridor over here. And if you look at the two sentences, what Biden and von der Leyen, the Commission president, said, they're very interesting. Biden said that the world stands at an inflection point in history. Together, let's work as one. I mean, that's interesting. And von der Leyen said that this is a historic breakthrough. You would have expected a word like a historic breakthrough in the context of the war in Ukraine, and that they are moving to the table to get a peace bargain. I mean, to say that a connectivity idea which has been launched is a historic breakthrough, one would have to investigate where is it that the EU is coming from. Clearly, there is an attempt to what I would call as a plug-and-play economic corridor, because this is not about really building up from the scratch, but this is about taking what is already existing and seeing that you can create a multimodal connectivity, which is seamless, well integrated from one end to the other end, right? And that's a big job if you're going to put out, because the countries are extremely diverse. The operating philosophies are very different. The infrastructure is not interoperational interoperable at this point in time. So that is an extremely long list of activities that is required. More importantly, I think it draws attention to the fact that you're looking at something which is not only transnational but transcontinental infrastructure, which has, if you look at the original starting point, been proposed by India. And I would draw your attention to that. I think it draws attention to what Omair was talking about, this global India or the India way as EAM talked about it. But probably let's put it on the table as, does it reveal something about the mobilizing power of India? The ability to convene a different set of actors around the table? Then that's the first it has happened. It's not that India is new to the idea of mobilizing. This has happened in the past. I mean, we only have to look back to the late 40s and 50s and non-alignment, the whole Bandung process. India was at the top in terms of ideas. But this is something different, and we're now looking at it in terms of that power of mobilizing to an idea which will produce an economic output which is extremely vital to India's growth and India's positioning in the global hierarchy of states. And I think that in my mind stands out as a significant development. A second point which I would like to draw your attention to as you look at this, in terms of the kind of connectivities, you're looking precisely, if you look at a map, and we were to put this also on the map, we're getting a global complex of web of connections. If anything, I think it is only emphasizing the interconnected and interdependence nature, right? And the question that then comes up is, how is it going to play out? That is more important. Muddassir, I think you were, in your opening comment, said the devil is in the details, and I think that's exactly where it is, because when you read the MOU, it's extremely silent. It just is a political statement about cooperation. I'll draw your attention to the fact that the EU woke up a long time back to the idea of connectivity and launched its own two very different initiatives. One is the Connectivity Initiative, which is there from September of 29, connecting Europe and Asia. It's about building blocks for an EU strategy. It's a long document which really looks at how both sides can come together, and it actually, in some ways, re-emphasizes the fact that Europe is tied to Asia. There's no getting away from it. And in greater parts, it is talking about the China end of that, and it's looking at. Remember, this is before COVID, this is 2019, but very fascinatingly, even as the connectivity strategy came out, it was the very same year that the European Union also said that in its strategy with China, China is not only a partner, a competitor, but it's a systemic rival. So there is the naming, if you would speak and put it that way, there is the naming of the actor which is detrimental to China. And still, if you look at it from a trade perspective or look at the statistics, it is anything but going down. China is the largest partner, and then how do you walk away with it? So in some sense, there was a very big question mark about these two different documents positioning the European Union vis-a-vis China in this kind of it. And then subsequently, in the middle of COVID, the EU came up with its own global gateway strategy, which was a financing tool for the digital, energy, and ecological transition, more to deal with Africa than to any other geographies of the world. And this was about trying to achieve not only what were goals of stipulated within the G20, but also the SDGs, but clearly looking at Africa as a target in the sense of creating this kind of a connectivity. Why is all of this important? I think for those who are not extremely familiar with the European Union, then it often presents itself as what I would like to call as a normative actor. We also call it as it is a regulatory actor. We also say that it is highly norm influential because it tries to set the agenda in terms of standards and then would like everybody else to follow through. And case an example in point is the GDPR, dealing with data protection. It's the most advanced on the books, lots of problems with that, but then everybody else is trying to adapt or work their way around it. Most of you would have encountered it when you click on a European website, it'll ask you for compliance as far as data is concerned. That's when you know that you're becoming part of a regulatory framework. Now, the EU, in all its documents, will emphasize three important elements in terms of modalities, that any activity should be sustainable, comprehensive, and rule-based, right? if you are going to look at that one-page MOU and what came out of the discussion between the leaders, that is not our takeaway when you're looking at the EU coming into this kind of a connectivity corridor, right? What we are looking at within this, and I take the words from the document, that this is going to be about technical, there's going to be emphasis on design, financing, legal and relevant regulatory standards. So clearly, if I were to take these words and use that as a yardstick, I would say there is a dilution of the EU's own normative preference in the rules of engagement of economics, right? Or how it likes to do business. Is it a conscious choice, or is it because there is no other way to do business, because it is now not looking at only China, but looking at expanding what it has, and this is important to emphasize over here. India is the other strategic partner for the European Union since 2004. And so clearly, when you look at the starting point of the IMEC, one of that is actually embedded in India. And I think it is to that extent that perhaps what we're looking at is something game-changing. We also have to, not rush to a judgment immediately and think that this is going to replace anything else. What I said, there is a web of connectivity, and one more is being emphasized in that web of connectivity. And therefore, there is the entire geopolitical and the geo-economic dimension as to why America and the European Union, three of the important member states of Europe, which is France, Germany, and Italy, have bought into this. That means they are willing to go with a different rules-based engagement for economic activity. And I think that, from a European perspective, is probably about EU also diversifying its policy options, but probably doing a reality check in the face of war, that what came from the global south, or what came from the southern part of the world in terms of the war in Europe, was an eye-opener for these people, and they would need to engage this very differently. And therefore, if you look at the IMEC, I would say that it's all about repositioning geopolitical choices and partnerships. That is the critical point here. I'm going to quickly conclude with 6 sets of observations over here. I think first and foremost, what you're looking at is the EU, in its cooperation with these set of countries, is collaborating for the first time in this specific kind of a partnership with non-Western countries. And that is important, because this is another kind of a grouping. We cannot call it, ideologically situated on the same line, which means that there is also some kind of opening leeway to engaging ideational partners for economic necessity. Is that something new? Not if you look at the EU-China trade statistics, right? I mean, if ideas and normativeness was the way by which EU would do trade, then China would be last on the list. So you clearly see that, what is an economic necessity or the political choice is not imposed as an economic necessity. Rather, EU is very willing to do business with anybody around the table, right? But here there is a select group of countries which has, 2 of them, the strong transatlantic units coming together to embed something in the global south, in the Indo-Pacific, which has not been spoken about. And I would like to flag that, because one has to think of it in a very large framework. You can't just think the IMEC is just standing alone in India's west coast and then going all the way up. Rather, it is anchoring that part of the Indian Ocean, which in the Indo-Pacific is now critically turning geopolitically extremely important. And I think that's the first point. Second, I think we will have to also consider about managing regional diversity, the politics and interest, which is going to be an outcome of the kind of vision of connectivity which is being envisioned over here, right? To assume that all these different countries can have an automatic interest convergence, I think, is a far stretch of an imagination. That's not going to happen. We also know that who dominates from a geopolitical contest within the Arab world, and that China's recent diplomatic forays has been a major reason to cause unsettlement, both in Washington and in Brussels, to be able to look at other kinds of engagements. Where everybody else was preoccupied with war, China quickly stole a diplomatic march. And that tells us about why New Delhi will also have to reposition its own diplomatic capability. The success of the New Delhi summit cannot be just a one-time thing. You'll have to constantly produce it to be able to repeat that. Third, I think if you look at the Asian countries, both India, Saudi Arabia, UAE, who are there, they all have very distinct and unique relations with Russia and China, and each of them is a subject of interrogation over here, which means that these relations will have positive sum games and the negative dimension, which will come in and impact the IMEC as and when it starts getting operationalized. If I were to just offer you an example, I mean, both my colleagues here are more of the experts on it, but UAE, it has security concerns, as a safe haven for Russian capital. This has been flagged, and as a transportation hub also for dual-use technology. So what happens when UAE then, is anchoring the IMEC part of it? China, for example, is one of the single largest buyers of GCC oil and gas, and it is also heavily invested in the region over here, and it is also constructing a military base in the UAE. So that means as China is repositioning itself, let's not think that this is the only game in town which is happening. China is equally alert in investing both in economic, political, and security terms. And that means it is raising a fundamental question for all of us this evening. Should one consider the IMEC finally as a de-risk strategy to China and the BRI? It's a long question. I do not have answers at this point in time. But I think it's important to look at the fact that there are multiple options on the table. Europe and the US coming in is extremely important in showing that the transatlantic anchor has come into the IMEC and that they are looking at different political choices. That is the first. Second, nobody is decoupling from China at this point. Let's be very clear about, right? What you're looking at is reducing your risk exposure. And if you were to talk to somebody who would be an investment banker, they would tell you that how do you constantly look at your investment portfolio, right? And that's what this is. The IMEC is a different kind of a risk portfolio, which can give you different kind of dividends. And it means that the countries over here are also, some of them in the GCC and India, part of it, fast-growing economies, long-term prospects, and markets extremely well-established in both Europe and in the US, and that is the important part over here. At this point, one would have to look at it. I mean, Omair pointed about countries being left out, and I don't think anybody can get left out when you will do a connectivity project. I think they would automatically. It doesn't mean that all business will bypass the Suez and go to Haifa. That's not happening by a long stretch of the imagination. But I think what we are looking at is perhaps that the political aversion to do a certain kind of business and the political reality check that everybody has had in terms of the way we look at geopolitics today and geoeconomics, that is fundamentally undergoing a change. And probably we're looking at a new multipolarity of connectivity on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bava. It's always, a delight to listen to you. So, you have really put a lot of things in perspective from the European perspective, and then you have also brought in the China factor, and obviously the, many questions about how it is going to really pan out. Certainly, we can't have, all the answers at this point. As we go forward, we'll perhaps see a lot of things, in terms of evolving also. We have Professor Raja Mohan. I mean, he needs no introduction to the audience. I would request you to at least give us a sense of two ideas. One is, there is a lot of discussion about the shift. So what is this shift from an Indian point of view? And then obviously the larger geopolitics, some of it ma'am also referred to. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Muddassir. And really, you heard this wonderful panel already speak, and all of them deal with the specific regions involved. So what I thought I'll do, maybe say a few things about India and how India's thinking it has this corridor, what it does for India's geopolitics and India's thinking. First, a word about the corridor itself. I mean, we had the question, what's in a name? Whether you call it West Asia corridor or Middle East corridor, it doesn't really matter. Because actually till the mid-50s, India used to use the term Middle East. Then in a fit of thing, we started calling it West Asia. West Asia is also somewhat of a conceited notion that we are in the center and everybody around us will be defined in relation to India. But the Middle East, I think maybe these two Arab experts here, they know Middle East calls itself Middle East. So it's not but it is really somehow got into us. It's very American. I think the Middle East calls itself Middle East. It doesn't really matter. In the end, this is really about, I would say at the heart of it, India reconnecting with the Middle East in a broader sense, but more fundamentally with the Arabian Peninsula. It is this new possibilities that have emerged between India and Arabia, if you will, in a sweeping sense, that really is the big change. And what I've been told, at least talking to some of the officials, is really, it was really, the initiative has come out of the talks between India and Saudi Arabia. That the original ideas, I mean, of we need to do something had come out of this engagement, because all of you know, last few years, there's been a dramatic change in India's relationship with Saudi Arabia and between India and the UAE. The trade volumes are growing dramatically. And we've had these regular exchanges between the Indian National Security Advisor and the Saudi security establishment. And one of the early ideas that led to this is really, India is an exporter of food, Arabia is an importer of food. So the idea of a food corridor, if you remember one of the earliest notions of a food corridor, and the food corridor idea also figured in the so-called I2U2, that's India, Israel, UAE, United States. There again, the US was really, what do we say, Sutradhar, rather than it's really an external actor taking charge. But the core ideas, Israeli agricultural technology, Indian land, UAE money. And I think what this corridor does is really think of this in a much greater perspective than a simple I2U2, which was more narrowly conceived. I think the problem, because when you say corridor, it gives idea of some kind of a physical road linking, I mean, even the CPEC, the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it's not just one line, it's built around the Indus, but there are multiple side roads going, linking. So it's really not a single line. There are also single lines. See, the Delhi-Mumbai freight corridor, I think just finally in 20 years, it's taking shape, or the Eastern dedicated freight corridor, which is Delhi-Calcutta, Delhi-Mumbai. One of the earliest corridor ideas in the recent times was really the Japanese one. So those corridors are beginning to come. So that is really a physical, railway lines can't go all around. They have to go in a straight line, largely. So this really, but this I think is more than that. I mean, as all our speakers said, the core structure exists. That is, trade between India and Arabia is growing. Arabia is a major trading partner for Europe. So what it is really looking at is to expand the connectivity within the Arabian Peninsula. That is, having a railway line. We had the only railway line historically in Arabia was really the Hejaz, which is along the Red Sea coast, connecting Jeddah to the world. But today, what we're talking about is a cross-desert line, which would connect from Eastern Arabia to the Red Sea, to the ports of Eastern Mediterranean. That is the big change. So I think that is the new theme here. Rest of it is already going on. I mean, if you can build this railway line, then I think it brings in interesting changes. We can talk about some of those. But there is talk about a physical line as well along the corridor. We'll see when the officials meet in 2 months. There's the idea of a hydrogen pipeline, which can actually, if India is going to be a major producer, Saudis are going to invest in a big way into production of hydrogen. So can you think of a hydrogen pipeline going? So then that will be a physical line that has to be built. Then the territorial issues get more complicated. But at this point, trade is going on despite Greece, Turkey disputes. The other is to also talk about a data line, that is a optical fiber or cables that can actually use for internet traffic. That's another idea that's being talked about. But all this is really work in progress. And we'll see how this develops. But I think what we need is at least there is a lot of interest and is a good moment to really reflect on not just the physical infrastructure that's going to come, but in terms of how it changes India's engagement with the Middle East, the broader regions to the west of India. So I thought I'll just make 3 points on how this changes India's thing. One, I think India's own ambitions for connectivity acquire a new life with this project. And those of you young here, I mean, the word connectivity was not part of the Indian diplomatic lexicon till the 90s. We were actually actively disconnecting from the world. If you go back to from the 1950 to 1990, we were not interested in trade, we were not interested in engagement with the rest of the world. So connectivity as a phrase, as an objective of Indian foreign policy was really a post-90s phenomenon and actually gains ground as India's economic reform, India's internal liberalization and external globalization make India a trading nation. So when you're a trading nation, you want connectivity. If you're not interested in trade, it doesn't really matter how you get your stuff. So I think that is a big change that has taken place. But then historically, India has had a huge constraint on connectivity. Which is one of the tragedies of partition of the subcontinent was that you had Pakistan and Bangladesh in different ways block India's access to the neighboring regions. India's own northeast is just linked to the chicken's neck. In the eastern subcontinent, at least, the improved relations between India and Bangladesh are transforming the regional connectivity in the eastern subcontinent. But in the western subcontinent, the difficulties with Pakistan mean that actually your ability to connect easiest routes, starting from Delhi, Amritsar, and then Lahore, Amritsar, and go further into Central Asia. That was the old Silk Roads, Resham Marg, whatever it was called. But then politically, it's not possible. So therefore, what India did was really explore opportunities through Iran. The Iran-India-Pakistan pipeline, there was one that was tried. TAPI, that is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. Then Afghanistan was in turmoil itself. And then using North-South corridor through Iran and Russia, which is circumventing Pakistan because anything that involved Pakistan was not going to happen. So none of these have taken off. Because especially the Iran thing, we invested a lot of ideas. But the fact is, Iran itself is a bit isolated. It's locked in a conflict with other neighbors, with the rest of the world. So the notion that we can use Iran to get into the heart of Asia, Iran and Russia, that was a big idea of a North-South corridor. But in fact, the paper we published from Singapore when I was the director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, the first idea of this corridor was when Professor Michael Tanchum, who produced that paper, which essentially is saying, look, you have the sea routes. You don't have to necessarily go through, nice on the map, you draw a line, straight line, Bombay, Bandar Abbas, boom, you're going inside. But unlike the Gulf Arabs, Iran is not an open trading nation. They've got all kinds of challenges. So here was the option that actually using the Gulf as a natural, and Gulf countries are traders. If you see most of the world's port logistics today are controlled by Abu Dhabi port of, on the other side, Singapore. So there were these other options which did not really figure in our mental maps. I think that is the change this one brings that, and this, it could not have been possible without a fundamental change in India's relationship with Saudi Arabia and Israel and United Arab Emirates. That is the change that has taken place. The first FTA, I mean, it's not a full FTA, but we've done something with UAE. The scale of investments from Saudi Arabia, with just the beginning of that game, and I think this is going to be one that is dramatically going to change. The second aspect, I think, what has changed is really how we think about the Middle East has changed fundamentally. Because historically, our focus was really on Egypt, Palestinian question, Arab and Israeli question. Those were the dominant themes. But in the last 30 years, what's happened is really the Gulf has begun to loom much larger than the Israel-Palestine question or those issues to the what we might call West Asia actually. But actually the Gulf today has become far more critical. Both you have India has 8 million migrant labor there. It's a major source of oil, $100 billion of remittances and investments. This again, I think in India, we've not paid enough attention to the transformation of the emergence of what people call the Khaliji capital, the Gulf capital. The three sovereign wealth funds of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar today make them into a rival center for finance today, to the old historic centers of New York, London, Frankfurt, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, that the Gulf countries have the unlimited resources, waiting capital, waiting to be deployed. And all across Middle East and North Africa is really the Gulf capital in the banking sector, in the construction sector, in the new technology sectors, that they're making this profound transformation that is occurring. And for the first time, we are preparing to tap into the Gulf capital as a way of advancing our own economic development. So I think it's really this engaging rethinking the Middle East fundamentally has produced, I think, a different possibilities for India. And I think that's the second big change. This link to this, of course, the Middle East itself is changing. There was a time when Egypt was the dominant power. Turkey today is. You had Iran. I mean, these were the main powers in terms of size, population. But today, the center of gravity in some ways has shifted to the Gulf, and what Gulf can do across the Middle East has increased. Second, I think also in the corridor is the central idea of a new Middle East. When you guys, I mean, you must have studied long ago, Shimon Peres of Israel used to talk, when the early normalization took place in 1991, the idea of a Middle East that is connected through railroads, pipelines, transport connections. This notion is almost 30 plus years old, because when the post-Oslo Accords, the normalization of part of the Israeli-Palestinian engagement produced the new ideas. But then it got into all kinds of trouble. But now we're seeing a revival of that. And at the core of it is really the normalization of relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which is what is being negotiated. And I think then you're talking about a historic fundamental change in the Arabian Peninsula. Even you can say Israel is really the westernmost, northwestern edge of the Arabian Peninsula in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think it is the internal change in the Middle East which is really at the heart of it. Because finally, the sea routes exist. It's really changing the nature of the trans-Arabian routes, which then mean really Saudi Arabia reconnecting. And I think here again, I think this is something we've underestimated in India. The rise of Saudi Arabia under MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is a big transformations are unfolding in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's modernization, its massive attempt at construction within. So this is a new Saudi Arabia that is rising in front of our eyes. And the corridor is really about bringing that Saudi Arabia from a closed, inward-oriented, sell oil and be happy, to one of actually investing money, being a financial center, and of shaping the regional geopolitics. This is Saudi Arabia moving to an active, outward-oriented regional power position, which I think is a historic shift. And I think that is the other change. Here, I think what augurs well for us is really the changing India-Saudi relationship. And finally, I would say, it's also how we think about these regions. That is, it's easy to, one of you said in the beginning, I mean, what we say Middle East is really links Europe, North Africa, to Asia, what we call Asia. But these are really, a geography teacher needs some clarification of telling students, look, this is what it's called, this. But on the ground, they're all, locking into each other. This is not, we know Turkey, Istanbul is the junction, Mediterranean, historically connected, Europe and North Africa. So these are not, but in a schematic terms, you think of them separately. And our own mental map said these are different regions, culturally, politically, and other reasons, but these are actually physically close. So what you're seeing today happen, I think this corridor is really bringing the capital from all the regions to really rejig the economic structures, reorient the connectivity in the region. That's a big change. And this also means new regions will come to our mind, which we need to deal with. The idea of Eastern Mediterranean, where actually Turkey is locked in a conflict with Greece. Greece is closer to Egypt. Greece is very close to UAE. So you have actually very interesting linkages between the Gulf and the Mediterranean states. And our foreign minister was recently in Greece. We have interest there. India recently sold some arms to Armenia. So the South Caucasus, Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, each of these regions are all adjacent to this junction where the three great continents meet. And I think this is going to also come into the fore. And the problems, both our speakers talked about the issues that come, the trade disputes, the territorial disputes. But my sense is, once you have something going, the good thing of a decent economic project is more people can be brought in, more people can make money, more successful it is. So it is not something exclusive, because in the end, this is about making money, this is about moving goods, this is about creating conditions. We often tend to think of corridors as a geopolitical project, but at the heart of it, they are economic projects. And economics is not a zero-sum game. And if those countries which want to eventually participate, I think we will be able to do that. I won't go into the other major powers, what they're doing, but my sense is Arabia is our neighbor. Red Sea, Arabia, Eastern Mediterranean, historically we've had engagements. I think reconnecting to them is a worthwhile enterprise on its own. Whether the corridor and the way it has been framed or projected takes place or not. In India, the trade's more with Arabia. There's more connectivity with Arabia and Europe and with the Eastern Mediterranean. That itself would be a worthwhile enterprise, irrespective of the actual construct that might come out of this, the very process that we are engaged in this, in partnership with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the US, with Europe, I think really alters the way we thought about all these countries and regions as some kind of a mutually contradictory forces. But today, we're going to work with them for our own benefit as well as for the region's benefit.
Thank you, Professor Rajamohan. I think we have come to a point that we have lots of food for thought. And, thanks for, putting that shift, which we were wondering as to what is actually shifting. The mental map in Indian policy or strategic, thought, that is really shifting. And that is something which is very, very, notable. It's not something which is happening just very gradually. It is very fast moving. And if you look at the Middle East or West Asia, I mean, the way things have transformed is extraordinary. It's unprecedented. And as you very rightly pointed out about Saudi Arabia, one of my favorite topics, if you look at the Saudi Vision 2030, it really talks about Saudi Arabia becoming the center of logistics and infrastructure. And they are really seriously working on it. I mean, there are lots of discussion about all these, almost megalomaniac-like projects, but perhaps it may not be far away that these will become reality. I mean, who would have thought the way Dubai today is 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, it did transform. So, but there's shortage of time. I would really like to, open it for discussion, and we'll be very happy to take questions. Please just, introduce yourself very shortly and be crisp. And it would be better if you have, direct questions to one of the speakers. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Wing Commander Dua. Most of the things that the speakers have said are nothing new. I mean, they've always existed, right? What has actually changed is the US-China equation. I mean, so is China the elephant in the room? I mean, the BRI corridor, the Iran-Saudi, coming together, making US uncomfortable. And a lot of these things, the Chinese influence in Africa, the growing influence, the US asking Prime Minister of India to come to US just before the G20 summit, right? And giving directions that this G20 kind of a thing should not be kind of, made to happen, right? So the point is China the elephant in the room?
We'll take cluster of maybe 3 questions and then open it for and then if we have time, we can go for another round. Anybody else?
Hello, this is Divyanshu. And just want to ask, like, was Abraham Accord, was long-term vision of US to hold IMEC possible at this moment?
Any other question? From the back? If there's anything? Yeah, please.
My name is Abu Zafar, and I have a question regarding that the goods going from Bombay to Dubai, and then downloading, then unloading, then it will take a lot of time and money, and how it is possible? At least 4 times from Bombay to reach to Europe or Greek. Thank you.
You want to go first?
On the issue of is China the elephant? China is always there, whether you mention it or not, don't mention it. It's the backdrop, at least for anything in Asia. I also said in my comments that should you look at the IMEC as a de-risk strategy to China? The fact is that this is an idea on the table, and substantial parts of it are operational. This is not something which is starting from scratch. What it is looking at is to make it more interconnected and seamless. Like somebody said, how would the goods move? And that's where standardization and interoperability, logistics, getting your standards into place will be extremely important. So that if something is going as a shipment from here all the way to Haifa, then it has to go through without any kind of loading and unloading happening. And those rules are still being worked out. But to assume that every action is only focused because of the new G2 game in town, also I think abuses the ideas of what other possibilities are there on the table. Everything is not just purely because of the China thing. I think that is an important element which is there, and I think everybody has been exposed to the downside of the single supply chain and what COVID and subsequent geopolitics has done. And in that sense, I think there is a looking at how can you intensify other corridors. And as I think Raja correctly said, we would miss what is happening in the Arab Peninsula if you don't see what fundamental transformation has taken place in the last 25 years. So for India, the advantage, unlike the others, is our relationship is not within the lens of the colonial, but it is within the lens of the historical and a civilizational link. And you're now trying to kind of modernize that relationship where the beneficiaries are on both ends, right? And so the benefit will be a lot more for us in our ability to transform a fundamentally existing old relationship with new components, and upend it with more strategic objectives.
Thank you very much. About China, I just would like to say we should ask who needs multilateral world more? Indians, Africans, or the Americans and Westerns? I think today the Western world is in grave need for a multilateral world. And of course it is not possible without India. And that is why they really would like to align with Indians to make the world I would not say safer from Chinese, but of course more multilateral and more inclusive. China is going to be and is becoming a real hegemonic power. And to stop this new emerging hegemony, we need, and the West needs, a country like India. About Abraham Accord, I would like to say that I have some different opinion about this Abraham Accord. We have to differentiate whether the Abraham Accord is popular with the regime and the people. And I must say that the people of the Middle East, they have not yet accepted, and we have to check it seriously how much this idea of Abraham Accord is going to be popular within the people, with the people of the region. And in the wake of any future uprising like we had seen in 2010, such accords may not stay there. That is why my understanding is that Saudi Arabia is extremely, extremely careful about having an accord like Abraham Accord without getting some good promise to have a Palestinian state side by side with Israel. In reality, what we have seen in the last 70 years is that Israel has got everything and Palestine is really shrinking every single day. And the burden of Saudi Arabia does not want to take the burden of this. And in coming years, of course, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, will face a test of his Islamic credentials. And he would like to fight for Islamic leadership in coming years, in coming decades. He has 50 years almost to rule the kingdom. So in initial 2 decades, he has enough time to play a liberal king. But in the next 3 decades, he has time to be an Islamic champion of Islam. So in coming years, in coming decades, he would become the champion of Islam, and then his task will be quite difficult. And that is why I think that he really wants the Americans to do something for Palestine. And if the Saudi assurances are delivered, I think that rest of the Islamic world will happily accept that thing, because they still have that trust with Saudi Arabia. And if Saudi Arabia is going to sign that accord, then Indonesia, Pakistan, and other countries will come. Bangladesh will come. Even Pakistan will come. If Saudi Arabia is going to accept, then many of these countries will come. But my understanding is that Saudi Arabia is not going to accept any assurance without credible promises. I think that some people in UAE, and they have written, some people in UAE, they have written good articles that perhaps UAE was given good promises, but none of them were delivered, and especially on the Palestinian issue. So you can see that there were some harsh criticism from UAE when there were some happenings in between Israel and Palestine. So that's why I still think that there is time for Abraham Accord to prove many things.
I think the question that you raised at the end, look, having a corridor is going to take even longer than Suez Canal, makes no sense. So you have a basic point. I mean, so the key question is, so it is about creating those standard operating procedures, standards for seamless movement, multimodal means, of a ship into a train. So that is the challenge, and that's where the negotiating processes of actually making this a seamless movement from Mumbai to Haifa, can it go in one shot without, in each place people opening up and saying, look, show me a triplicate or 8 copies, we're going to be signed. So those working out, which in any case will be good for India, if you can actually improve our trade facilitation, where we can make things simpler in terms of movement of goods, that will work, but that has to be seen. So that's why from the beginning, we're saying it's work in progress. A big idea, but that has to be implemented. Second, I think on the question of US and China, look, I mean, US is #1 power, China is #2. They're everywhere in the world. China is in the South Pacific, near Panama Canal, in the Latin America, the investments are everywhere. Does it mean we don't do anything in our own neighborhood? That Arabia is next door, and that you can actually trade more with them. They have the money, you have the market. You're saying, let's build more connectivity so that both of us can benefit. I don't care what the Chinese do or the Americans do. When I have an opportunity to build a new relationship with the Arabian Peninsula and leverage this to my own gains, that's the reason why the initiative has come from India. And I heard Europeans and Americans came in later, that it was really an India-Saudi initiative to build on, and India and UAE already had a good relationship. So I think, look, we have agency. So I don't think we should worry all the time about G2, what the Americans are doing, what Chinese are doing. As a third largest economy to be, we should also have some confidence in our own capabilities, our own markets, our own neighborhood. And I think that's where I would say this is a big idea. But I think the possibilities, unlike, you're not running around for money. The guys who are involved have the money. We have the technology, we have the political will. So my sense is that is what is new, sir. And we can keep talking about US and China all the time, but the new thing is we are looking at a region. There is, for the first time, our relationship with the Arabian Peninsula very, very different. they're positive, that is new. The idea that Saudis and Israelis might normalize, that is new. I mean, what are the terms? We have to see, but last time we heard from MBS, he said, we're getting closer by the day. But these things are said, but to actually get there. But my sense is, the Middle East is changing, Arabia is changing, and that's opened a huge number of doors for us. The question is, are we ready to take it or not?
Can we take another round? Yeah, so very quickly, because we are also running short of time, so please, sir. Yeah.
So it was said that they have the money. How much money is required when you say the sea routes exist? Then it's only a question of a few ports which are also half ready or nearly full ready, and a rail line. To those optic fiber or hydrogen pipelines, etc., are separate issues. But how much do pipelines, optic fiber, and a railway line across the desert cost? It doesn't cost more than maybe $10 billion, all three put together. So what's this big thing about money?
Anybody else?
So basically, like we had that in G7, that Build Back Better World. And in that, like we promised to deliver the finances to the world and by countering the BRI of China. And we didn't see any concrete steps toward that. Is that IMEC is a concrete step towards that? Thank you.
Yeah.
A very short question. How are you figuring this South Asian region in this corridor? Say Pakistan has been a problem, so to avoid it we have another corridor. But what about other, like Bangladesh is a emerging market, it is producing a lot. How are we figuring it in this corridor?
We just have 6 minutes, so maybe just one question.
I actually have 2 questions, but they're very short. Yeah. One is, how do you address the security concerns of individual nations? And the second is, how do you see the role of private players in terms of upgradation of technology, moving in ports and shipments, vehicles?
I don't really want to say no to the young, students sitting there. So just, okay, so anything else? Yeah, that is the last one. Yeah, quickly. Very quickly, yes.
Hello sir, I am Ayushi. I wanted to ask if Saudi Arabia and USA are involved, and Saudi Arabia is asking for two-state solution by USA. Do we see relative peace between Israel and Palestine in future?
So let's go in reverse order, and maybe all the panelists can really kind of concluding remarks, including all the questions which were raised. So
I think the security issues will be there. But the thing is, as you start working them through, I mean, these issues will have to be, multiple set of issues will have to be dealt with. But as I said, the biggest gain for us is you engage in a set of activities of taking active leadership role in expanding connectivity with the Arabian Peninsula. I mean, that is the core of it. And in the process, also linked with Europe. There will be issues because no transcontinental project like this will be without problems. But the important thing is to start doing it, because without that, we're not going to get anywhere. On the money, sir, I think really without money, nothing happens. It's not the size of the money, that the Gulf capital, until now we've largely relied on remittances. But the fact that they can invest in India today in a bigger way, in your ports, in your infrastructure modernization, that is new. When Mr. Adani had a problem, where he went to save the company. I mean, it went to the Gulf. Today, somebody said, are the ports? I mean, Mr. Adani owns port in Mundra. He also owns the port in Haifa. So Indian capital is linking up with the local capital. That is the new thing that is coming up, which will produce results of its own. I think that's where we are. But I think in that sense, there are multiple problems, but it's a new venture that we're embarking on. And the question is, how this plays out is going to be a story for the next 20 years. It's not something you just build a piece of real estate out there.
Just very quickly, from the experience in Europe and why things would be different. The one thing economic cooperation does is two very different scenarios from a policy side and from a business side. Business thinks extremely long term if the opportunities are good. So business is going to be looking at the next 30 to 40 years of investment over here. And when that comes through, policy is easier to follow through, right? Policy is about the political understanding to enable private capital to come in and have the safeguards in which they can get good returns on investment, right? And if the fundamental shift, as Professor Rajamohan pointed out, is the shift in the way you're looking at Arabia today. It's not that closed world. It is transforming rapidly at a speed in which we are not able to assimilate. And what this economic cooperation will create is returns of a very different kind. The word to use over here, it will create a confidence building mechanism for multiple players, right? And as far as the question on technology is concerned, I mean, this is not something which is just going to be a public sector or only a policy thing. Ultimately, the biggest players and movers in the game are going to be the private companies. And they are the ones who are going to realign everything, get the business to line up, the biggest takeaways is that if somebody was wanting to think about learning a new language and where, I mean, I'm somebody who's specialized in Europe, I would say look at the Arab world, start learning Arabic.
Good first.
I think that we have to understand that all the Gulf nations, they have agreed on the fact that they have to build a non-oil economy. And this is not possible without having good projects like this. And for having a really functional non-oil economy, they need to invest a lot. They have been trying for the last 20 years, but still the progress is slow. But if we see their seriousness about it, they are really, really serious. For example, if you see just indicators, how much railway lines they have built in the last few years. For example, in Oman alone, they have 2,000 kilometers of railway lines ready. Qatar is just nuclear. Saudi Arabia has already either 5,000 functional or in progress. Iraq has mostly new rail lines, 2,000 kilometers. And Iraq is one of the fastest country in establishing railway network all over Iraq. And they have also announced a new rail route with Turkey recently, from Basra to Okowaya in Turkey. And similarly, you see Jordan and UAE and other countries. Saudi Arabia has already worked on Dammam to Riyadh and Riyadh to Jeddah and Jeddah to, and from Riyadh to Aqaba also. So they are already building a huge railway network. Of course, they have to take a lot of care due to their specific geographical conditions, but they are investing a lot. And they need expertise and support and a good network. And because of the fact that if they build this kind of network, financially they may not be that much viable for future. So that's why they need a global network which can use this railway network to go ahead beyond the Arabian Peninsula, to go to Israel, to North Africa, and to Europe. And I think that Professor Sirajaman was right, and is right that the Gulf is going to be the most important player in the next few decades, because they are becoming the place or the engine of at least regional growth at this time, but in coming years, they are also going to be the engine of a greater Asian region, or in the entire African and Asian region. And IMEC is going to become an important factor in helping them and helping India to be part of this progress.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Omair, thank you, Professor Bava, Professor Rajamohan. I think one of the points which Dr. Omair mentioned, the Gulf economy is looking at post-oil, future. That is a key here. And if you look at the transformation which is going on in the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and then Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. This is something extraordinary. This is futuristic. It's already one of the business hubs of the world, and it's going to be perhaps the business hub in the world. And as Professor Mohan was saying, that it's India's neighborhood. There was a question about China. Yes, China is a factor, but it will become an elephant in the room if we make of it. It's as simple as that. And if one looks at, for example, there were questions about the Israel-Saudi Arabia normalization. Even without the political normalization, the economic aspect of Saudi-Israel, or the Gulf-Israel rapprochement is already unfolding, and it is very quickly, going to become one of the major factors. As there was some points about how these, Eastern Mediterranean, the Gulf, the South Caucasus is, to be seen as the junction of connecting the three mega, land masses in the world: Asia, Africa, and Europe. And this has always been so. It is not something which is new. If you go back, if you go back even before the trade between Arabian Peninsula and the southern Indian Peninsula, the Indian Peninsula of the West Coast, it has always been there. The exchanges have always been there. So that is something where the opportunities are. One cannot really remain in the old mold of thinking of just geopolitics, of thinking of things from the lens of what is ideologically what fits in your kind of definitions. So that is something which is very, very important to overcome, to go out of your comfort zone, look at your interests, look at the opportunities. For Europe, for example, as you were saying, Europe has been forced to really come out of its comfort zone. For India, the political will to really go out of your comfort zone and seek the economic opportunities. That is something extraordinary which is happening. Yes, we don't really have the blueprint as to how things will unfold. Yes, there is no clear way as to what really would transpire. And eventually it would be the economic logic, the business logic, the geoeconomics. That is something which is very important to note. As there were some points, or one of the points I was saying in the beginning, that it is the tributary and the distributary system of a river flow. That is something which has to happen eventually. That will be the most important part. And eventually, if there is an economic logic, countries like Egypt, Iran, Turkey, who are really right now feeling perhaps left out, they'll also join, and there is no harm in it. So this is something which is important in the sense that it is thinking about future. From the Indian point of view, from India, West Asia, or India, Middle East point of view, there is certainly a geoeconomic pivot happening at this point. It is unfolding, and it is unfolding fast. And also, one should also, I should flag this, that this is not, business opportunities will not wait for you. When it comes, you have to really grab it. Otherwise, things move on. The trading nations or trading states or business people, they would find opportunities, they'll move on. It is up to you to really grab those opportunities and be part of what is happening at the larger level. So I think there are a lot of things, but perhaps the final point is it's the economy, and that is where it all matters. It is up to us to grab this opportunity. Thank you very much for being a very kind audience, for hearing us patiently. Thank you to all our panelists, Professor Mohan, Professor Ummu Salma Bava, Dr. Omair Anas, and thank you also to Asia Society and the India International Center for hosting us. Thank you.